Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to the ItCast, Real Talk on Sex. I am your host, Nika. The ItCast is our community outreach podcast that increases diversity in conversations on health and sexuality. Through this work, we are creating a world where all people feel loved, honored, and respected. This episode is brought to you by the House of Sherelle. You can check out our online store at triggerhappytoy.com. This is also brought to you by the International Institute for Sexual Empowerment, a 501c3 that is creating a safe space to talk about sex. We have events coming up. You can check those out at our website, nikasherelles.com. Just check on our calendar and join us. If you want to get one-on-one coaching with me, you can visit my Calendly to book a free connection session. Let's talk. I love to know how I can serve and support you, and I look forward to hearing from you. Ask us anything, send in your questions to the show, and we will do our best to address them. Get access to our bonus content on Patreon, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and share with your community. All right, let's dive in. This week's topic is real talk on how we view disability. Our guest is returning champion, Carli Guzowski. Carli is a certified sex coach and board certified sexologist and pleasure and kink activist. She combines these skills with a BA in psychology and training in trauma responsive care to provide a holistic approach to her work. Carli supports her clients moving beyond sexual shame and embarrassment to experiencing a fulfilling and pleasurable sex life they desire. She owns Unwinding Pleasure, offering one-on-one virtual coaching, workshops, and public speaking. Carli also writes the Your Pocket Sexpert blog, where she responds to anonymous questions about sex and intimacy. All right, Carli, let's have you on the show.
Hi, Nika.
Welcome back. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me back. I'm so excited to be with you again.
Absolutely. So I know we have a really, really powerful topic today, and I know it's something that's near and dear to your heart. So let's go ahead and talk about what that means. Our views on disability.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'll start off with a little bit of background and why this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So yes, I am a clinical sexologist and I'm a sex coach, but that's only been within the last couple of years. The previous about almost 17, 18 years, I spent my time in working in the field, supporting people with disabilities, physical and intellectual disabilities. That was my career for a very long time. And in that career, I did a lot of different, had a lot of different jobs. I was a direct support professional, which means I provided direct care and direct support to people with disabilities, whether it was in a day program or a workshop, what they were called at the time, or a group home. Or even, just going out and helping people access their community and things like that. So I spent a lot of time doing that kind of stuff. And then as my career progressed, I became what's called a qualified intellectual disability professional, which is a QIDP. So for probably about, I think 10 years was at least just about as a case. It was basically a caseworker. So somebody who gets to know different people with disabilities, gets to know what they want in their life, gets to know all the things about them, medical histories, anything that I needed to know about them, and then working with them to create a plan for them, an annual plan, helping them reach outcomes that they wanted to reach. And I did spend some years doing quality improvement. So that mostly encompassed doing and knowing and understanding a lot of the laws and the rules around what we could and couldn't do, what things we had to meet as a disability agency, which I had already been doing for a long, long time in my role as the caseworker type position. I actually held a lot of different roles. I did a little HR. I did a little, it was a very small company. So we all just did a little bit of everything. I attended medical appointments. I've run the gamut basically of kind of what you can do within the disability field when it comes to supporting directly those folks.
Yeah. Yeah, I got that. And thank you for
Mhm.
that service. I know you've got a really great view of the inside of how things go there. And I'm actually curious for you to talk a bit more about the rules and regulations. And I'll also, for everyone out there listening and watching this show, while we are talking about Real Talk on Sex, we're also looking at all of the things that impact that, and being in a conversation around disability in this arena is very, very important. So go ahead and give us some more on the rules and regulations.
A little bit more about the rules and regulations and what that was like. I think working within
Hmm.
those parameters and everything. So when so one of the things I want to say just really, really quickly, I want to make clear, like I myself do not have a disability. I mean, I do wear glasses, but I don't have an intellectual physical disability or anything like that. So the lens I'm coming from is as an advocate and an ally. I am also, a family member of, some people who have disabilities, and I'm also a friend to a lot of people that have disabilities. So those are kind of the different perspectives and lenses that I see it from. Um, and so in my role throughout, it was really important for me to know and understand the laws and the rules, and that's state level and federal level. So the types of places that I spent the bulk of my time were in what are called intermediate care facilities for intellectual and physically disabled people. So in that space, we fell under not only there's federal regulations, so that's Medicaid, and then we also fell under state regulations, which was through the Department of Developmental Disabilities in Ohio, which is where I am. Um, the state level laws vary from state to state. So right there off the bat, we're already hitting kind of a barrier because some people can live in some states and get a lot of really great support. And in other states, they don't get quite the same kind of support because it just varies from state to state. In the facilities that I work, excuse me, the group homes that I worked in, and I'm going to say too here, there might be some old lingo that comes out of my mouth that I've been trying. It's just because that's just been ingrained in there. And I'm going to do my best to not use some of those terms and stuff, or at least explain if I'm using them. But it's like I said, it's just one of those things when you work in certain kinds of worlds. If you work in a hospital, if you work in, at the DMV or where, in those different spaces, they all kind of have their lingo that they use. And I recognize that some of it's not so good. So that. So so a lot of what I did, especially as a QIDP or that qualified intellectual disability professional, I had to know really thoroughly what Medicaid laws were. So those were in group homes, those ICF group homes. There were a lot more regulations in those spaces because they were serving people typically that had more significant disabilities. Many of those folks needed a lot of support, meaning they needed support with, eating, with their care in the bathroom, with their care, getting dressed, all of those things, and being able to access the community and all of that. Um, and I can tell you, it got really, really frustrating because, we were in spaces where they're telling us, we have to be able to provide certain kind of services and certain kind of support, but we weren't getting funding. We could only pay our staff,
Hmm.
maybe $10 an hour to start. I mean, that was way back. I mean, now we're finally getting to a point, I think, where a lot of places are they've recognized the need for funding, especially the fact that there's massive staff turnover. So we're finally getting to a point where some places are getting up to $15 an hour, but that's with only the last few years. Um, So, here we are, they're telling us, we need to make sure that people are able to access their community more, that they're able to get more individual support and things like that. But one of the homes that I provided support in had 10 people living there, and we typically would have 3, maybe 4 staff on shift. And so to be able to provide some of that individual care, we couldn't do that as much as we wanted to because of the limitations we had financially. So we were running into a lot of barriers with that. One of the things that I had run into in this state, and one of the things that I was responsible for in much of my career, was investigating incidents that adversely impacted people. These were things like theft, abuse, neglect, injuries, that kind of stuff. A lot of times, we have a really good system in the state of Ohio for addressing these kinds of incidents, but in my opinion, we aren't any good at preventing them.
Right.
So we're reactive, not proactive. And so, in those situations, we would get, something would happen, and then we're scrambling to investigate, try to make sure that we can prevent it from happening again, but we didn't necessarily prevent it in the first place. And sometimes, it's just, again, staff turnover. We're
Right.
constantly training people, constantly. And then usually our response in those situations was to train people. You can only do so much training, it only can take you so far. And,
Yeah.
sometimes we'd be stuck in situations where an accident would happen, somebody would get hurt, and it was just because we just did not have enough staff. We didn't have the necessary staff in place.
You mentioned you mentioned the turnover and how that can have an impact on the person who's being cared for, especially on their emotional state, in the realm of trust. Can you share more about that?
Yeah,
And yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that question. I think that's a really important question, and an important topic to talk about because, you know, let's, and I want to do a little bit kind of an analogy here. Like if a person enters a relationship, and it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, any kind of relationship, um, you know, when those two people are together a lot, and they get to know each other, they start to learn each other's quirks, they start to learn what each other likes and doesn't like, and how they act in certain situations and stuff like that. It's the same thing with the staff that were providing support to the folks that we supported. um, so when you have staff that's coming in and out, constantly having new staff coming in, we lose all of that. We lose that connection, that trust, that knowledge that happens in that relationship, that staff to client relationship. And what can end up happening is, as the person who's receiving support, they begin to almost get into a high alert state
mm-hmm.
because they're constantly having someone come in, or constantly having new people come in to provide support to them that might not know and understand what they like, what they don't like, and things like that. And so what ends up happening is that person is just constantly on alert because they're constantly having to relearn that person too, and
Right.
understand how that person is as well. Um, and so it can cause a lot of difficulty for people that we're supporting.
Yeah. Yeah. The best word you used there for me was trust.
Yeah,
It takes so much to develop a sense and a level of trust with anyone, and then let alone having them constantly, play in and play out is that can be very frightening. Um,
absolutely. Yeah, and actually, I just want to make another quick point. Is
yeah.
we're talking about some people who are providing very intimate care, and intimate meaning they might be, washing that person up in the shower, or if the person uses a brief or something like that, they might be the person that's cleaning them up. You know, they're the person that's assisting them with getting dressed. And think about that. If you have a stranger who's responsible for providing care and support, you don't know who they are, and they're seeing you fully nude, touching you in places that, it's yes, for people that do receive that kind of care, but there's still that level of trust and that needs to be there for that, especially if there's somebody who may have a trauma history or something like that, or had been abused or neglected or anything like that.
That is an incredibly intimate and vulnerable space to share with someone.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about behavior, and you were talking about like the hypervigilance and things like that. One of the things that you mentioned was that we look at behavior versus symptoms and the way in which that can be problematic.
Absolutely. So one thing I will say, I have been saying this for years. We all have behaviors. Okay. We all have behaviors. But the thing is, when you're looking at my behaviors versus somebody who has a disability, all of a sudden, like you said, it becomes its behavior versus just either a symptom of something that may have happened to them in the past, or it could be something, something that's bothering them. If I wear an itchy shirt, if I've got a shirt and it's fucking the heck out of me, I'm going to go take it, sucker off, and I'm going to put something else on. But if I can't verbally tell you, and I can't use sign language or anything like that, because either I haven't been taught, or maybe that's just I communicate in different ways. And especially if it's somebody who doesn't know that person and how they communicate, and that person's ripping at their shirt and trying to tear it and everything else, and batting at somebody, all of a sudden we've got behaviors, and we have to control the behavior, right? And it turns into this power dynamic, and it turns into a situation where that person is not being heard, and that person, it's not being viewed as just, oh my gosh, get the shirt off of me, it's driving me bonkers, to it could escalate into an awful situation just because that person isn't being listened to and they aren't being heard. Yeah.
These things bring up the conversation around consent and disability.
Yes.
I think, when you were talking about the vulnerability and the intimacy of being in that space and having someone touching you or not understanding your communication when it comes to behavior, can you talk a bit more about what that looks like or even could look like in the realm of consent and disability?
Absolutely. And thank you for that. So when we're talking about consent, how we teach people about consent, everybody learns differently, right? And one of the things that we need to do, especially with folks with disabilities, is really understand how that person learns. And that person may learn through behavior more than they do by reading a book or watching a video or, hearing something verbally. So when people that provide supports and provide services to folks with disabilities or disabled people take the time to show and use their behavior to show how proper relationships should look and how those proper interactions should look. So, for example, doing something like, hey, I'd like to put your wheelchair right now and take you into the other room. Is that okay? So right there, and we're asking that person for consent. We're giving that person autonomy, that agency back to that person, so that they understand that it's their decision, it's their choice, and it's their body, and their wheelchair is an extension of their body. So that we're showing that person, okay, you have a choice, and I'm showing you how you can verbalize or vocalize your choice in that situation. Even just saying, I'm going to, clean on your under your armpits now. Is that okay? Or could you put your arm up? I'd like to clean up under your armpits, having that person do that, things like, there's a lot of ways. But I think the biggest thing is just communicating with that person what it is you're going to do, or asking those questions to that person.
Yeah. No, that makes a big difference. And it's the kind of thing where if someone just walks up and starts moving you, it's very disorienting. They start grabbing your body parts or whatever. And I even think about the lack of training and maybe even the time, like you only have so much time. And it can be really, really intense. I think that the communication and really acknowledging that the behaviors are coming out of symptoms of whether it's fear, whether it's frustration, or whether it's even actually pain, those things need to be addressed.
Right. Absolutely. And I have supported people who express their, so that express that their pain with violence. And I can tell you, if I have a really bad headache, I have had moments where I want to bash it into a wall, right? But if I use a wheelchair and I need somebody else to get me medicine for my head, and I can't communicate that verbally, or things like that, I might start hitting my head to communicate that information. I might bang my head backward. I've supported individuals who have had toothache, start banging their face. I've had, I've supported people that because I was too close. I was in their space. I was in their bubble, and that was their way of saying, "Hey, you're in my space. Can you get back a little bit here?" And so it's one of those things that we have to learn, instead of reacting, putting behavior plans in place, things like that, to learn, okay, what if, okay, for example, if somebody's peripheral vision isn't very good, or they've been startled in the past because somebody comes up and pushes their wheelchair and they catch somebody out of the corner of their eye, they may swing out and hit because they don't want to be startled. So there's that kind of, in that old part of the brain, that fight, flight, freeze, it's kind of on all the time because, maybe they lived with somebody who was violent, and in their past, that person would sneak up and bop them in the back of the head or something like that. So if I'm walking behind somebody and, they, like I said, they may, because they're protecting themselves, they don't want to get bopped in the head. So yeah, there's a lot of things, and it really is, I've seen it happen so many times where people will just jump to, well, that's just behavior and we need to put them on a behavior plan. We need to get them on medication. We need to do this, that, and the other thing. Right. Instead of really taking a step back and saying, okay, what is this person communicating to me right now?
Right. Behavior is the symptom. It's the side effect of whatever else is going on.
Yeah. My favorite saying is, all behavior is communication. I can't take credit for it. That is one of my favorite sayings.
That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah.
I recall my uncle was in a nursing facility before he passed, and they kept talking about how he was angry and aggressive and a number of other things, and he kept complaining about his hip hurting. Well, as it turned out, his hip was broken. And it had been that way for months, to the degree that when they found out, they couldn't even operate on it. And that was the kind of thing that just got ignored.
Yeah. And I'm so sorry that happened. I've in doing investigations, into incidents, and I have investigated things like that. And it breaks my heart when, here's someone who's completely reliant on other people for care and support and safety.
Yeah.
and they get ignored.
And we have these thoughts. You talked about earlier that personal bubble.
Mhm.
And I think we talk about agency and autonomy and personal space so much when we're not dealing with someone who needs care, whether we're talking about a child or an infant, or we're talking about someone who's elderly or just in any way disabled. It, like, those things kind of go out the window. And I think there are a lot of assumptions made.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've been doing some training in trauma responsive care, and one of the things, and I've had it over the years, especially in what I was doing before, but one of the things that
That
I found more interesting is that we often project our personal feelings on the other,
Yep.
right? And I have a good example of that. So, when my daughter was young, when she was 2, 3 years old, she would get into these screaming fits, and it made me feel uncomfortable. And I wanted to comfort her, but she would not let me hold her. She would
Mhm.
bat at me. She would scream. She would, no, no, no. And it was so hard to just sit there because it made me, I wanted to help her. I wanted her to feel better and everything else. And that's exactly what we do for the people that you mentioned. I've seen it happen time and time again. And those feelings, those thoughts, those belief systems, whatever they are, end up getting transferred over. We push them on other people sometimes.
Right, right. We try to fix them the way that we would want to be cared for.
Exactly.
And the word being fix.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know we talked a bit about physical disabilities, and I think that's a really big, easy one to acknowledge and note. But I want to talk also about intellectual and cognitive disabilities, because I know that's a whole different world. And I leap into this one because I recently had a conversation with someone around how you can't fix someone else's depression.
Mm.
You shouldn't take it personally. The depression is it's its own animal. So please share a little bit more. And is there a difference between intellectual and cognitive disabilities? Are those the same thing?
Mm. So yes, typically there's about three, 4 words. There's intellectually, and there's incognitive. Sometimes you might hear the word delayed. I don't use that one quite as much, but there are, in some spaces that does get used. Intellectual disabilities just basically mean that someone has a delay in their ability to process information. And so their level of development may hit a certain point and stop. Um, and one of the things that I think, that we've been combating over the years, over the decades, really, is this idea that, well, if their cognitive abilities are, if they're only going to get to, and this is old language. I'm going to put a disclaimer on that right now. This is old language. That they're only going to be, to the level of a 3-year-old. Well, then what's the point in um, teaching them anything? You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to hit a point and then they're going to stop. But that's old, like I said, old language, old thinking. Thankfully, a lot of people have, presumed competence is kind of more the motto now, in that we will support people as much as we can and put things in place for that person to be able to do and do as much as they can for themselves. Um, on the flip side of that, I think what's important to do is making sure that we also listen to the person, observe the person, especially if they use other ways to communicate other than maybe written word or verbal, communication, observing their behavior and how they communicate. Um, we need to know that there's a point where we're just going to frustrate someone,
Yeah.
right, in trying to teach them to do some kind of a skill. If a person has challenges with dexterity, teaching that person to tie their shoes is probably not going to be very easy for that person. It's going to be very, very frustrating. If a person doesn't understand, this was always my big frustration. They wanted us to, everybody had to learn about money. And I was like, that's great. I have no problem, and stuff like that. But, I did support people who literally would try to eat the money if I gave it to them. So we had to look and say, okay, if that's what's going to happen, then we need to look at other ways that this person can participate in their finances that doesn't involve putting them at risk. So it's really a lot of being creative and looking at, okay, not necessarily looking to do it at all, but how can we help this person participate in all of these things, parts of their lives, in ways that make sense to them. So maybe it's going to the store and, picking something out to purchase, things like that.
Hmm. I love that. I love that. And as we're talking about the cognitive disabilities, it has me think about the fact that even though these people are in a space where they're not cognitively normative, I'll say, that doesn't mean that they don't still have, and this is where I'm like talking about sex, like needs, desires, their body's going to mature, they're going to have thoughts and hormones and things like that. So that's another thing in terms of, I don't even want to say how do we deal with that, but how do we support people in dealing with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it, every person is different. Every body is different. Right? And so I think the very foremost thing that we have to do is meet the person where they are. Um, I have supported people who have openly clothed, but, touched themselves or masturbated in public. And so in a situation where that person may not be able to take themselves to their bedroom, we, just go up and say, hey, this is something you need to do in private. Can I assist you to your bedroom? So those kinds of things. So it really is about, again, supporting that person where they are, understanding what their behavior is communicating to people, and helping them to do things appropriately. And it might be, for example, um, somebody who has autism or an autistic person. That person may need some pictures to convey how to interact with someone appropriately. So maybe, for example, they might touch people inappropriately. Maybe they touch women's breasts, something like that. So you might need to have a very detailed and outlined social, what's called a social script. So either a verbal or with written words or with pictures that explains, okay, this is how we interact with somebody that's appropriate. Um, so there are a lot of different ways, but again, like I said, it really has to do with getting to know each individual person and what that person needs. It's not just like, my gynecologist isn't going to treat my vulva and my vagina like every other woman. I hope they don't.
Not
Right. In my situation, I don't want to go to, someplace where I need to be treated as an individual. Like if I went to the store and, every single piece of clothing was one size fits all, well, that's not going to work for everybody. And it's the same thing across the board for everybody, but especially with disabled people is it has to be individualized. It has to, we can't just give everybody the same. That's why I would get so frustrated with the money stuff. Because I was like, but it doesn't work. Blanket thing for just everybody. But yeah, so when it comes to teaching people about their bodies and about sexuality and about what that means and what it means to relate to other people and what a relationship that's romantic looks like versus one that's not romantic, we have to have a lot of things in place that speak to that person and that support that person versus like, oh, here's a social story. We'll just use it for, 20 different people. Well, that's not good.
The thing I'm hearing the most is not chastising people
Mm-hmm.
and not holding everyone to that same standard. So the idea that you're someone with a cognitive disability is not necessarily a pervert. They just
Right.
don't have the languaging and the awareness of what's happening based on social structures and whatnot. So I think that's really, really a powerful way to look at it, because it can be harsh, it can be judgmental, it can be damaging
Mm-hmm.
to put that on people who are in that situation.
Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you something. We talked about this in our last one about sex education.
Yes.
Most people with disabilities don't get any sex education. It so right there, right off the bat, we're setting people up for failure. And say, for example, you have somebody who has a lot of support needs, like maybe they need assistance in the bathroom and stuff like that. Let's say this person is 30 years old. So they've had a lot of years that they've been getting support from people. So one, they've probably had hundreds of different staff that may not ask them if it's okay to touch their genital area, and even if it's just for cleaning.
Right.
So right there, we're already teaching people that it's okay to touch somebody without getting consent. you know um, I've also witnessed coercion happening, where people get bribed. It's time to go take a bath, let me give you a candy bar, or give you chocolate, or when you take a bath and you can have this piece of chocolate, things like that. So there's coercion that's going on. And then when you throw in there the statistics that people with disabilities are 3 times more likely to be abused in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
We've got people with trauma histories. If we aren't going to teach people about their body, not going to teach people about appropriate relations and how to relate to other people appropriately, and then we're going to turn right around when they do start exploring their bodies or things like that, and then slap a label on folks, we're doing a huge, huge disservice to
Yeah.
that person.
Yeah. This is fascinating, but it really never occurred to me about the lack of sexual education for people who are cognitively disabled.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, the fact that that didn't cross my mind blows my mind. And, we're looking at the same time caretakers who are not trauma informed, who are not aware, who don't know how to communicate. And so then furthering and pushing the abuse and the lack of comprehension. I think it is mind blowing, because I say this all the time. One of the things we want to do is raise people to be functional parts of society. And a large part of that is how you relate to sex. So, yeah, thank you.
And I do want to throw out there that it's not all doom and gloom. I have worked with some fantastic people from at all levels of, in the field, whether it's the folks that are providing direct support, all the way up, that are very open. And there are lots of people I've encountered, colleagues and different people that are in other states, in other countries, that are doing awesome, fabulous work in these areas.
Yeah,
And they really are trying to make sure that people are not going down those paths. Like I said, I don't want to make it sound like it's all horrible and all awful. There are amazing people who are doing some amazing work
yeah,
to help people and support people. It's just we've got a lot of cleaning up to do.
that is
you
so true.
know it's not that long ago. I mean, we're talking late 70s, early 80s, where people were just coming out of institutions and literally just went into smaller institutions.
Right.
And so we still have those that exist, these group homes where there's a lot of people that live in one space and share space with other people.
Yeah.
So we're getting there, but
Yeah.
it takes a long time.
I have to throw this one in because you said it's not all doom and gloom. And I'm going to be super straight. I support sex workers. I really honestly have seen and heard a number of scenarios where this is often the place where people are going to be able to experience any type of touch or care or communication. And it doesn't even have to be sexual, it can just be intimate. But that's an arena where I've spoken with people on both sides of the line, and it's valuable. It's valuable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even people having access to adult entertainment, you know, is another avenue. Having access to sex toys, and having and the ability to make decisions. I not directly did I support anybody that did this, but I do know of several people who utilized sex workers. To be able, and they made that conscious choice,
Right.
got paid, and that was what they did. And more power to them, because it's it's their choice.
Yeah.
They're right. We all have that right to, you know, have a healthy, sex life. Some of that, what goes into that, is educating people,
Exactly.
and that's where we need to do a better job, is educating people, because that's how we keep people safe.
I love that. I love that. The other thing I'm hearing is it really gives them more agency and autonomy around their sex life or whatever is present there. And to be flat with everyone, a healthy sex life does not mean having sex all the time, but it's about having a healthy relationship with
Yes,
sex and sexuality.
absolutely. Yeah, and the ability to choose if that's what they want to do. Maybe they don't want to.
Right?
At least they have the choice to say, yes, this is what I want, and no, that's not what I want.
The choice.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. This is this is incredible. I mean, I love we're getting into some juicy places now. And it blows my mind. I told them, like, I wish we could talk more.
Yes.
um oh gosh. I will share this one tiny story. This is where I had that discovery first. I while in my journey of making sex toys and a number of things, would go to places. I would go to places like strip clubs, and I would talk to the performers and such. And I was at a strip club one time, and this guy walked in, and he had a cleft palate, and it was very evident. It was very, like, it was the kind of thing where people wouldn't pay attention to them in a human attractiveness way. And I saw the people in there caring for him and, like, hey, you're here. It's good to see you. And it was so much more than just the sex of it. It was the care and attention and intimacy of getting to be around people who aren't going to judge you for that.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you think about someone who has a disability, um, and they're looked at as, like you said it earlier, we have to fix that person, right? They're broken because
Hmm.
their legs don't work, or their brain doesn't work, or their arms, whatever it is. And these are people that have been, in the past, in years past, experimented on with their consent, um, you know used for all kinds of awful different things and stuff like that, because they were viewed as less than. And how wonderful is it that that gentleman could go into that space and feel whole, because he was being treated as the person he was, and not for his medical condition or how he looked. Yeah.
Oh, that one almost brought me to tears. Okay, Carli, tell us about more of your work. I know this episode is from a lot of the work that you used to do. So if there's any resources, information, things you can guide people towards, please share.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I am happy to offer resources about where people can go to learn more about supporting people with disabilities, with teaching about sex and sexuality. One website that I do think is really great is called elevateus.com. It's ELEVATUS, I believe is what it is. But like I said, people can go to my website and reach out to me directly. I have a form. And right now I think it says like just allows people to put coaching or public speaking, but go ahead and type in a question there. Or I'm even happy to, if somebody wants to use my questionnaire for Your Pocket Sexpert, and wants to put their email in there and just say, hey, I have questions about where I can get some materials or some support, that's fine. Go for that. And like I said, my website is the best way to get connected with me, especially if you sign up for my newsletter, which is on there as well. And once you get my newsletter, you can, bounce that, shoot me an email back from that. I can be found on Instagram. So that's another way that people can reach me through DMs, on Facebook and LinkedIn. So those are some places. I don't do as much. I'm still an advocate. I'm still an ally, and I'm more than happy to go to spaces and talk about sexuality and disability. At this point, I don't provide coaching necessarily to folks with disabilities, but it is something that I can do, just based on the experience that I have in the past and stuff. So.
And their caretakers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a big missing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am available for workshops with disability agencies if they, somebody's seeking a little bit of support in that area. It's kind of a topic that is very, very hot topic. And I think there are some places that kind of just, we're just not going to go there. But one of the things that I can do is I can actually frame it from an approach that's not even about people having sex,
Right.
but more about how do we support people with teaching about consent? How do we teach people with, relating to other people and entering into relationships and stuff like that? It doesn't always have to just be about sex, but also assisting staff on what to do and how to respond when somebody that they support is expressing themselves sexually and they're not really sure what to do. So.
Yes. Okay, thank you again for being on here. This is wonderful, and we're making a huge difference.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again, Nika. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, we are going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you for joining us today. This is the ItCast, Real Talk on Sex, our community outreach podcast that increases diversity in conversations on health and sexuality. Through this work, we are creating a world where all people feel loved, honored, and respected. This episode is brought to you by the House of Sherelle, and you can check out our online store at triggerhappytoy.com. Also, the International Institute for Sexual Empowerment, a 501c3 nonprofit that is creating a safe space to talk about sex. If you would like to get one-on-one coaching with me, please visit my Calendly to book a free connection session. I always want to know how I can serve you. And you can see bonus content on our Patreon. Learn more about this work at theitcast.com. Subscribe to this channel and share with your community. Thank you so much. We will see you next week.